the beginning of a war no one expected. Long before armies gathered and swords clashed, the story began in a moment that seemed peaceful. It was a grand celebration, a gathering filled with joy, beauty, and power. Gods and mortals were present, and everything appeared perfect. But sometimes, the smallest interruption can change everything. And in this moment, something unexpected appeared. A golden apple. It was simple in appearance, yet it carried a message that would spark conflict. Written upon it was a challenge, a question that would soon divide even the most powerful figures. It was meant for the fairest. At first, it seemed harmless, but then three powerful figures stepped forward, each believing that they deserved the title. None of them were willing to step aside, none of them were willing to lose. What started as a celebration quickly turned into tension. The air changed, the mood shifted, and instead of resolving the situation among themselves, they made a decision that would lead to something far greater than any of them expected. They chose a human to decide, a young prince named Paris. He was not a king, he was not a warrior known for great battles. He was simply chosen to make a decision. But this decision was not simple. It was not just about beauty, it was about desire, ambition, and consequence. And Paris had no idea that his choice would shape the future of kingdoms. In that moment, everything was still calm. No armies had moved, no blood had been spilled, but the seed had been planted. And once a seed like that is planted, it does not remain still. It grows, it spreads, and soon it becomes impossible to stop. Paris stood before the tree, each offering him something in exchange for his decision. One offered power beyond imagination, another offered wisdom that could guide him through life, and the third offered something different, something more personal, something that touched the heart instead of the mind. She offered him love, not just any love, but the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. This was not a simple choice. It was a moment that tested desire against reason. Power and wisdom stood before him, yet his eyes were drawn to something else, something that promised happiness, something that felt irresistible. And so he made his decision. He chose love, but this love came with a cost. The woman he was promised was not free. She was already married. Her name was Helen. She was the wife of a powerful king. Taking her would not be seen as an act of love, it would be seen as an act of betrayal. And betrayal has consequences that cannot be avoided. When Paris took Helen and brought her to Troy, he did not just bring her with him. He brought anger, he brought insult, he brought a reason for war. What seemed like a personal choice became a public conflict, and the world began to react. The news spread quickly. It moved across lands and reached the ears of kings and warriors. And when they heard what had happened, they did not remain silent. They began to prepare. This was not just about Helen, it was about honor, it was about pride, it was about power. Leaders called their armies, ships were prepared, soldiers gathered. The scale of what was coming began to grow. This was no longer a small conflict, this was something much bigger, something that would involve many nations and many lives. Among those who answered the call were warriors whose names would be remembered for generations. One of them stood above the rest, Achilles, a warrior of unmatched skill, fast, strong, and fearless. But even he had something that made him vulnerable, something hidden beneath his strength. As the armies prepared and the ships moved toward Troy, the world held its breath. A storm was coming, and once it began, there would be no turning back. The city of Troy stood strong. Its walls were high, and its defenses were powerful. It was not a city that could be taken easily. And when the armies arrived, they quickly realized that this would not be a quick victory. This would take time. The war began, and it did not end quickly. Days passed, months passed, years passed. Battles were fought again and again. Each side gained victories, and each side suffered losses. Neither side could claim complete control. Inside the city, fear grew. People lived with uncertainty, never knowing what the next day would bring. Outside the walls, soldiers fought with determination, knowing that giving up was not an option. The war became more than just a conflict, it became a test of endurance. And as time passed, frustration began to grow. Both sides wanted an end, but neither side was willing to surrender. And so the war continued. Achilles entered the battlefield like a force that could not be stopped. His presence alone changed the outcome of battles. Enemies feared him, allies relied on him. He was more than a warrior, he was a symbol of power. But even the strongest warriors are not free from conflict. At one point, a disagreement caused him to step away from the fight, and when he did, the balance shifted. The enemy gained strength. Losses increased. The absence of one man changed everything. Eventually, he returned, and when he did, the battlefield changed once again. His strength brought fear back to his enemies, but faith was already moving forward, and faith does not wait. Despite his power, he had a weakness, a single point that could bring him down, and when that moment came, it changed everything. His fall became a reminder that no one is beyond fate. And yet, even after that moment, the war was not over, because the greatest twist of the story had not yet come. The war had gone on for years, far longer than anyone had expected. What began as a mission to bring back one woman had turned into a conflict that consumed entire nations. Soldiers had grown older on the battlefield. Young warriors had become experienced fighters. And still, there was no clear victory for either side. The city of Troy remained standing, protected by its strong walls and determined defenders. Outside those walls, the attacking forces struggled with time. Supplies became harder to manage, morale began to weaken. The idea of victory started to feel distant. They had tried everything. They had fought with strength, with skill, with courage, but none of it was enough to break the city. Inside Troy, the people lived with constant fear, but also with growing confidence. They had survived for so long, they had resisted one of the strongest forces ever assembled. Each day that passed without defeat made them believe that they might actually win, that the war would end with their survival. But long wars do not end easily, and when force fails, something else takes its place. Something quieter, something more dangerous, something that does not look like a weapon at all. The leaders of the attacking army realized that continuing the same way would not bring victory. They needed something different, something unexpected, a plan that would not rely on strength but on the mind. And so they began to create something that would change the course of the war. They built a large wooden structure. It was unlike anything seen before, tall, massive, and carefully designed. It looked like a gift. It looked harmless. It looked like something left behind after defeat. But in reality, it was something else entirely. At the same time, they made another move. They left, or at least they made it look like they had left. Their camp was abandoned, their ships moved away, the battlefield became empty. From the walls of Troy, it appeared that the war was over, that after all those years, the enemy had finally given up. Hope returned to the city. Relief spread among the people. The long suffering was over, or so they believed. But what they did not see was the truth hidden in plain sight. Because sometimes the greatest danger does not come from what is obvious, it comes from what is trusted. When the people of Troy saw the empty land outside their walls, they felt something they had not felt in years: peace, the fear that had followed them every day, began to fade. And there, standing in the open, was the wooden structure, large, strange, and impossible to ignore. Some questioned it, some felt that it was too unusual, too convenient. They warned others to be careful. They suggested leaving it alone. But after so many years of war, people wanted to believe that it was over. They wanted to believe that they had won. Slowly, that belief became stronger than doubt. The structure was seen as a symbol of victory, a final message from a defeated enemy. And so, they made a decision. They brought it into the city. They pulled it through their gates and placed it inside their walls. In that moment, everything changed. The war that had lasted for years was about to end, not with another battle, not with another fight, but with a single decision that could not be undone. As night came, the city became quiet. For the first time in years, there was no fear of attack, no expectation of battle. People rested, guards relaxed. The tension that had filled the city for so long disappeared. But inside the wooden structure, the truth remained hidden. And as darkness covered the city, that truth began to move. Hidden warriors emerged. Quietly, carefully, without warning, they moved through the city, opening gates, creating paths for what would come next. Outside, the army that had seemed to leave returned. Under the cover of night, they moved back toward the city, and when the gates opened, they entered without resistance. The city that had stood strong for so long was now completely unprepared. What followed was sudden, fast, overwhelming. The defenses were gone. The element of surprise was complete. And in a single night, everything that had been protected for years was lost. The fall of Troy was not just the end of a city, it was the end of a story that began with a simple choice, a moment that seemed small but led to years of conflict. A reminder that actions have consequences that cannot always be controlled. The war had shown strength, courage, and determination, but in the end, it was not strength that decided the outcome. It was strategy, it was deception, it was understanding the mind of the enemy. The story of Troy is not just about war, it is about human nature, about desire, about pride, about the decisions that people make and the results that follow. It shows how easily things can change, how quickly a situation can turn. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: not everything is as it appears, not every victory is real, and sometimes the greatest danger is the one that is welcomed inside.